Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today we're continuing Book 4. We're looking at Chapter 7, which we did, 4, 5, and 6, we dealt with democracy and oligarchy. Now, we still talking about regimes. He wants to go over the varieties of varieties of regimes, what's left. Well, let's go on this. Let's go to what he says. He says, there are further two sorts of regime besides democracy and oligarchy. One's of which is spoken of by all, and we spoke of earlier as one of the four kinds of regimes. The four they speak are monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, and fourthly, so-called aristocracy. So there's, and now he goes, and there's the fifth sort, which is referred to the term common of all. They call it politeia. But because it has not, because it has not often existed, so it doesn't exist. It doesn't really exist. It is overlooked by those who undertake to enumerate the kinds of regimes, and they only use the four as Plato does in his works, in the work, the regimes, the politeia, which is this is 35, or perhaps they only use four as Plato does in the section regarding the regimes, the politeia. I mean, regimes. The regime is the politeia is the name of the republic. Okay, the Greek is politeia. The Latin is respublica. The Roman Latin translation of politeia is respublica. And the title of Plato's republic is the politeia. It's the regime, right? So therefore, this is a kind of reference to the joking about. Therefore, they're calling it the regime. It's the regime called regime, but that's the Plato book. Okay. There's kind of maybe there's and by doing it that therefore that and Plato doesn't even talk about regime. They do it like Plato does, and because it doesn't exist, doesn't often exist, doesn't exist. Okay, now let's take this. There's four types of regimes, and this is the one even Plato listed. There's monarchy, oligarchy, democracy, and fourthly, so-called aristocracy. Not kingship, monarchy. Okay. But now there's the fifth thing, which is common to all, which is politeia, the regime called regime, right? But then, but everyone follows Plato, right? And again, the book is called about his account of regimes. Before that he does it, this is given in the politeia. So therefore, there's kind of a joke. The politeia, these are the four forms of politeia that Plato in his politeia discussed about, and therefore this is erroneous. There's a fifth one that never really doesn't occur that often. He says, but therefore the regime called regime, which really doesn't exist that much. So therefore it kind of it kind of throws, and this is instead of really suggests there is really this thing called regime, politeia, called politeia, and there's not really a strong case for politeia as a really regime. He keeps on doing it. It actually collapses into the best regime. So again, like Plato, whose regime politeia, about politeia, which is the best, the regime of the wise, the best one. Again, this is why there is kind of a playfulness here with this discussion of politeia called politeia. But it's about aristocracy. Now it is right to call aristocracy the regime we treated in our first discourses. And by this, 36, the reference here appears to be a discussion of the best regime in Book 7 and 8, rather than to an allusion to aristocracy in Book 3, considering Book 7, Chapter 3, where the definition of aristocracy seems clearly includes a generic one. So this idea that this is where he's giving his account. Pardon, my throat is getting dry again. I'm gonna. It's kind of cool outside. It's like heat, and the humidity just drives it. So, in other words, it's all this. The regime of Book 7. This is what we call right aristocracy, right? The best regime. Only the regime that is made up of those who are best simply on the basis of their virtue, and not of men who are good in relation to some presupposition, some claim, this specific claim, is justly referred to aristocracy. So therefore, the real aristocracy is a regime of the best men, the best regime of Book 7 and 8. Okay, but I'm going to suggest that Book 7 and 8 isn't really that good. We'll see why. And contradicts things. This is... but let's look through this here. Um, um, it is a presupposition. In other words, it's not men for whom who are good in relation to a presupposition or hypothesis or something that is a claim, like an assertion. A hypothesis is what? What is a hypothesis? I assert something to be true that I'm going to test, right? That's science. This is same thing. That this is the presupposition is a claim I assert to be true. Okay, a presupposition is an assertion of a truth. It's not necessarily true, and therefore they claim to be good in some presupposition. Is just only those who are really virtuous, not those who claim they're virtuous, right? And for that, for only there, it is simply the case of the same person who is good, both good man and good citizen, while those who are good in others are in relation to their regime. So therefore, in other words, this is what's interesting. Therefore, the other good citizens are in a relationship that they're good in relation to other things, not to the good, not really the complete virtue and the good human. Therefore, the virtue in the other virtues, not the supreme virtue, this is going to be kind of tied to their regime. They're good in relation to the regime. Most citizens are good citizens in relation to the regime. Only in the best regime is the good citizen a good man. So this is the clarification of the argument of citizenship there, of in book 3, chapters 4 through 5, I think even 6 a little bit. So we get this idea that only there's aristocracy. The real aristocracy is the best regime. We've talked about it elsewhere. Okay, and then everything else that claims to be that, a claim about virtue, is a presupposition and not really aristocracy. Nevertheless, there's a certain regime which differs from both those that are oligarchically run and from so-called regime, and are called aristocracies. So now he's now going to talk about those things that are called aristocracies, but they're different from regimes. Regimes called regimes. Now I disagree. Again, Lord decides to translate polity. He sometimes when he thinks, this is his interpretation, that polity here means that politeia, in that Greek word that's there, means in the generic sense or the specific sense. And then in the generic sense, he'll translate it as regime. In the specific sense, he'll translate it as polity. That's an error. The word is politeia. We should keep the word simultaneously. Why? So that we can see the play going on. We can see the play and figure out what's going on and notice the fun, the puns involved, and that there's something going on here. Maybe that there's a contradiction. This is how you interpret things. When everything works fine, you stick with the surface. It's when there's problems or confusion that you have to think through things, and then maybe there's another argument underneath or something, and then something is there's something here that is kind of okay, it has two meanings. Well, think of what the two meanings mean and play with the meanings. And take out the consequences of the meaning. This is how you discover the truth of what is being argued. Okay, when the surface of an argument satisfies, there's no need to go deeper. You go deeper when the surface is unsatisfactory, and it's unsatisfactory when there's unclarity. Not clear, there's double meanings, there's multiple possibilities. The phrasing as it's written in the language is not clear, and you have to work out the logic of it. or maybe there's too many possible positions. Okay, now this is what we're going to do through here, right? So therefore, in other words, we're going to be looking at the so-called aristocracies. That they're oligarchically run. That those that differ from that simply that they're not they're different from oligarchy. They're regimes different from oligarchy, but they also differ from regimes. I mean, popularly run regimes, right? And are called aristocrats. They're called aristocracies, but they're not real aristocracies. There's, for whatever they elect to offices, not only on the basis of wealth, but also on the basis of desert. So they wealth and but also desert. The regime itself is different from both of these and is called aristocratic. In other words, so therefore this is what it's not only on the basis of wealth, but also on desert. They elect people anywhere they elect on the merit of not only wealth. It's oligarchically run mostly. It's kind of the fruit of the few. There's not going to be everyone. Everyone's not participating. Not everyone's not going to be the deciding element. Only the best. These people who have good, usually they have good birth and good qualities like this. And what they do is they remember again. This is the type of oligarchies. When the oligarchy order, the few who have the wealth, when they select from everyone, and they do it on merit. The idea we pick the people on merit. That's aristocratic. When they put it on the terms of only my own wealth, then that's oligarchy, right? Okay. And therefore, that's what he's saying in that sense. And this is why they're called aristocratic in that sense. For indeed, in cities that do not make virtue a common concern, there are still certain persons who are of good reputation and are held to be respectable. Okay. They're respectable types. Wherever, therefore, the regime looks both to wealth and to virtue as well as the people, as in Carthage, it is aristocratic. So, whoa. In other words, aristocratic. That's an oligarchic regime. Remember, he said it's an oligarchic regime, but it's weird. Carthage is like, in other words, it's the people are the wealthy and many, right? He says, therefore, the regime looks both to wealth and to virtue, as well as it cares about the people, right? And this example is Carthage, but Carthage was an oligarchy. Um, um, and the people is the multitude, in other words, as well as the multitude, right? The multitude. And the multitude is the wealthy in that regime. Okay, so remember that. So the Carthage example, right? It is aristocratic, right? That's weird. It's that he asserts that here he asserts that Carthage is aristocratic, but does he say that? He says it's the best. No, it is of the three actual regimes. It is the best of the three, but it's still said to be defective in that it overvalues wealth, right? And it's oligarchic in its characteristic. So now he continues, semicolon. And so also those which, like the Spartan regime, look to two alone, virtue in the people. And where there's a mixture of these two things, democracy, and therefore the people, the multitude, and virtue. So, whoa. Carthage, but he makes reference here to Carthage and then Sparta. Carthage is more aristocratic, but what it's tied, it's aristocratic in that it's wealthy and virtue, but as well as the multitude. Here is two alone, virtue and the multitude, the people, right? And where there's a mixture, a mixture of these two things, of democracy and virtue. In other words, this idea of democracy. But that's not the critique. What he says here contradicts the position he gives in Book 2 about both. If we take Book 2 to be valid, what is being said here is not the case, or not completely the case. So then, therefore, is this? What about this? Now, some popular people say this mixing of Carthage and this is the polity, right? This is the mixing of these principles is therefore this is what polity means. It's a mixed regime. Now, no, all regimes can be mixed because all regimes consist of parts, and there's going to be a mixing of parts that defines the regime, and the regime has certain denomination, and that Carthage in Book 2, that's presented in Book 2, is not as virtuous as the Carthage that is presented here. So, in other words, here what we present is more kind of and also Sparta. This is how many partisans of both these. The view that's presented here is a presupposition, not the truth. If what is presented in Book 2 is the truth about those regimes, therefore, what is presented here in Chapter 7 about these Carthage and Sparta is a presupposition of those who are partisans of those regimes, and they claim to be an aristocracy of a certain kind, or a mixture of things. That both of these are this, right? So therefore, this is weird. We end with an account of Carthage and Sparta here, right? And that Carthage is kind of aristocratic, and a Spartan is kind of a mixture of democracy and virtue, right? But Sparta is oligarchic. It's oligarchic extremely criticizes it, right? Because it violates, because it is highly democratic. The meals were supposed to be democratic, but because they make people pay the meal price, it's the only place where they don't do that is Crete. So Crete does the meals better, right? This popular function. But Sparta does it worse, and by doing that, it excludes the people and becomes more oligarchic. That was the account of Book 2. Therefore, this doesn't hold true to what we know what he said earlier. So all of this is like, what's going on here? Why is this thing being argued? Is it valid or not? It's not. I don't think it's valid. I think this is a presupposition of a claim of what we call so-called aristocracy. In other words, we're going to look at an aristocracy that's not. It's a presupposition of good birth or something else, something that comes close to this, like the Spartan and Cretan regimes, and also that they're not pure. They're not really virtuous regimes. They're not democracies, and not they're more oligarchic in their character than democratic. But at the same time, they have certain elements that are finely done. Remember, it's actually invertedly. That the best one of it's the last one, Carthage, the non-Greek one, is the least bad, and the next, Crete is in the middle, and Sparta is of these so-called finely administered, held to be finely administered places. It's the least. Now let's continue this last sentence here, right? There is therefore two kinds of aristocracies, besides the first or the best regime, and these are and there is a third whose forms of so-called polity, which incline more towards oligarchy, so-called regime towards more oligarchy. So therefore is these Carthage and this, but wait a minute, it's like polity, but inclined more to oligarchy, but that's Sparta. In other words, the first is the best regime, the second is these, and the next is the so-called regime called regime, the polity, the regime, so-called regime, which inclines more to oligarchy. But that's Sparta does this, in the fact of his account in Book 2. So, is there really a politeia? It's something that doesn't often exist, and the account of it here. First, oligarchy. What is our aristocracy? There's two types. He says there's just three. there's the best one, and there's that, and then there's the one that's a regime politeia called a politeia that inclines to oligarchy. But let's literally understand that an oligarchy. So therefore, it's a kind of oligarchy that has a presupposition to something that it's better than itself, more than mere accusation of wealth. It's a regime that is inclined towards oligarchy. Isn't that what's ultimately the third answers the question? If we read it literally in the Greek, it answers the question of what the thing is. It is the politeia towards oligarchy. But therefore, the second one is really just a presupposition of it, and that the third one is merely a regime that is moved towards oligarchy. So that there is something that calls itself that's an oligarchy that's oligarchic institution. In fact, that makes a presupposition, a better than itself. And then there's the true virtuous regime. That's the real aristocracy, and the other one is so-called aristocracy, where it's usually about family, education, or some manifestation of virtue other than true virtue. So let's stop here with this end chapter 7 here, and this weird chapter 7 is kind of a weird chapter, where he says things he contradicts himself. He contradicts things he said earlier, particularly about Sparta and Carthage, and then he has that weird ending where I think Lord's translation hits away from the truth. Because if we read it literally, those forms of so-called regime which incline towards oligarchy, those kinds of regimes that politeia that kind of oligarchy, well, that's okay. Then therefore, regimes that incline towards oligarchy. It's an oligarchy regime, and the so-called. Therefore, there's a variety of oligarchy that tries to be better than. And he already said this already in both those accounts, and that is that they are, and that how they select. In other words, and how the oligarchy and how they elect their officials. If they choose to elect them by taking the better sort and they elect by merit, that's oligarchic. So that even a democracy, a democratic regime that all of a sudden we're going to elect by merit, that can be aristocratic, tends towards aristocrat against that. So therefore, this is a very interesting thing about the text. If you think about what is actually said here, it suggests that, and again, remember the two wins, the popular win and the elite win, then therefore that aristocracy is in a way merely a deviation from one of the wins, that it's a deviation aiming towards not the principle of the regime, but away from it towards the best by selecting merit. Okay? We're going to elect the offices based on merit. That's aristocratic. Election, when we elect people because we choose the better, this is an aristocratic principle. In oligarchy principles, we choose the one who's wealthy. Democratic principles, we just have a lottery. Okay? A lottery is the most democratic form of election. We just simply everyone is equal, so it doesn't matter who gets elected there. Once we choose people that we choose, while we choose them, we think they're better. Therefore, that's aristocratic. So therefore, election, we elect people based on election of choice, where we choose the better candidate. That's aristocratic. Okay, and that's why you can understand this in a certain way. We'll end here on this note. If you have any on this note, on here, if you have any questions, please put them below, and when I see them, I will respond to them. If you've liked it, like it, share it with a friend, share on social media. If you didn't like it, say why, so I can respond. Maybe I learned something. You can follow me on social media. Okay, in other words, I have to mention, I forget this in the spiel. I have to remember. If you've want to have, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe so you get notifications and things like this. If you know friends who want to encourage others to subscribe, I want to grow the channel so we get bigger. You can follow me on social media below. The links are below. Now, there's another thing below is the links to if you want to help the channel. YouTube is starting to make it's. I have to pay now monthly to keep my videos. The amount of videos I have is too big. I'd have to either delete videos or I don't even have my email anymore. So it's kind of blackmail. I can't my Google Mail. Okay, maybe I should create another Google account, right, and make another video. But um, what about doing this? This is the way you can help. You can do it through Subscribe Star Patreon. But then you say you don't do any special options for us and give us it. Okay, this is no one there. If there's someone there and there's a pile of people there and want me something to do something, I'll do it. Okay, I'm not an idiot, but I'm not. It, it, it's just I'm not doing this for the money really. The money would be help to pay something to continue make it a little easier to do it, and it'd be maybe good to, if I get some money, I would be able to buy use. I buy the books anyways, my own money. So, but if I had, it covers the cost of doing this, makes it easier to live a little bit, not live, but to do this. Um, you're being subsidized in my normal life. Okay, great. I don't mind doing this. This is I enjoy. I'm doing this because I want to put these kind of things out. Have a record of my thoughts on this. This is vanity project. Right? Okay, yeah, whatever. Um, that's why I'm doing this. So you want to help, you can help. Another way you can help, you can do it either through that, or you can use Google. You can direct money through Google. Direct, Gmail. You can find my Gmail very easy. My name at my name, first name, second name, period, like first name, period, second name, at alphabet. Okay. Here, another way you can do this is buy the book. I have other books, but you buy this book, I get the money immediately. In that sense, like Lulu will give me some money. It gives me money per book, much more than the other. My Washington University book doesn't give me any money. My LSU one, I'll get every year $100 from them. This one, okay, I'll get some, not a great amount, but per book, about much more than I get per book in the other one. Okay, the LSU book. Okay, but this is not a commentary. That's a commentary. This is a what? It's a study guide. It's an assistant aide. It's called a notebook for politics, a workbook. It's a study guide that guides you through the text. It's like Cliff's Notes, but not a mere summary. It's not. It has. Okay, that's a blank page. Yes, I have a blank page. Every book, I have the blank page where you can put your notes on. So you can take your own notes at the chapter, any thoughts you have. You can have. It has outlines. It has structures of here. If it goes to the book by book by book, and then it goes chapter by chapter, and it highlights. It helps you go navigate the reading of it. Helps you go through the reading of it a little bit. It's a useful tool to students and people studying the text. And buying it, this is where you can help. Okay, so you buy it for yourself or buy it for a student, someone who's going to be a student and read the politics. So that's the shill. I shilled. Okay, I always have to end these videos with a shill. I apologize. Now we'll turn next time we meet to chapter 8. Again, have a good day. Take care. See you later. Bye bye.